Right, exactly. Well, good morning. We're going to try and kind of pick up where we left off on Palm Sunday, if you remember that far back. And I want to take a look at the tabernacle. So it's significant that essentially Exodus 25 from 25 to 40, concerns this tent structure called the tabernacle, right? So obviously, if that much space is devoted to it, it must be important, which it really is. So I'm going to say a few things about it because we're going to come back to it when we go through Leviticus, and we'll come back to it again when we go through Numbers because it's interspersed through all those books. So a couple things about it this morning to kind of put things in perspective. On Palm Sunday, we began looking at some of the things that are in the tabernacle. So it's this kind of rectangular shaped tent. And the most important thing about the tabernacle, as we'll see right at the end of the book of Exodus, is that God actually dwells in it. It's God's dwelling place with the people of Israel. Not figuratively, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but really. God's actually really present there. So there are a number of things that means. So a brief description of some of the tabernacle furnishings, and then a little bit about the tabernacle construction, because that's significant. So last time I think I mentioned that the main thing, the most important thing that's in the tabernacle is this kind of gold-covered box called the Ark of the Covenant. The tablets of the law, the 10 words, are placed in there. So in many ways, the Ark of the Covenant is sort of like a divine safety deposit box in many ways, right? It's where God's covenant with Israel is kept so that God is aware of it and the people of Israel are aware of it too. And then, as we also noted in chapter 25, there's this really important thing that sits on the top of the Ark. It's translated in various ways, sometimes called the mercy seat. It's a cherub on each end. They're facing one another with their wings outstretched. And this part of the tabernacle plays an important part in the Day of Atonement, which we'll describe in Leviticus 16. So I'll say more about that. But anyway, the idea here is essentially that the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat are, in effect, the earthly analog of God's heavenly throne. So here's what God says to Moses about the Ark of the Covenant and about the mercy seat. This is Exodus 25, verse 21. And you shall put the mercy seat on the top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I shall give you, the tablets of the law. There I will meet with you, and from the mercy seat and from between the cherubim that are on the ark of the testimony, I will speak to you. So here's what you want to imagine. I don't know if any of you have been to like a royal palace, like Buckingham Palace or something like that, right? And the high point of the place, right, is always the throne room, right? So if you go to the throne room of Buckingham Palace, right, it's called the throne room, but its technical name is the chamber of the presence. Because when you go in there, right, you are in the presence, capital P, of the monarch. That's what's going on here with the mercy seat. Okay? As Moses stands in front of the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat, he is standing in front of the throne of God, the chamber of the presence, capital P. Now, there's some other things in the tabernacle that we just want to kind of acknowledge, and I'll be saying more about them later on because they appear in other books as well. But there's also this a table. It's called the table of the bread of the presence. There's more instructions about it in the 24th chapter of Leviticus, but for now we can say this. Every week, the high priest is to put on that table a stack of 12 loaves of bread, a stack of 6 loaves, and a stack of 6 loaves. So two stacks of 6 loaves. And of course, this is kind of flattened bread, not like the kind of bread you buy in Publix, right? This is kind of like a flat bread. And the bread is called the bread of the presence. And we're told in Leviticus 24 that it serves as a memorial. It has a memorial role. And the memorial is this, right? The memorial here is, it is a reminder, quote unquote, to God of his commitment to the people of Israel. The idea is not here that God's going to forget, right? It's not that God has like senior moments and he says, oh, I have a chosen people? Oh, okay, yeah, I guess I do. It's not that. Rather, we want to think about this as kind of like a mercy, right? So God says, okay, here's this gold-covered table. Every week you are going to place these 12 loaves of bread. They're the bread of the presence, and they're going to be a visible reminder to me of my covenant with you. It's a reassurance to the people of Israel, right? That these 12 loaves of bread are standing in God's presence, and God sees these things, right? And so he remembers and remains faithful to his covenant with the people of Israel. Then there's this lampstand, which is in the outer part of the tabernacle. So the tabernacle has two sections. There's a part called the holy place, and then there's a division that's called the most holy place where the ark is. So standing before the most holy place, there's this kind of lamp that's described in Exodus 25:31. And it really serves two purposes. One is the practical purpose of just simply lighting the space so you can see what's going on. But of course, it has a symbolic function too, right? It represents the light of God. It reminds the priests as they go in, right, that they're entering into the presence of God. And so the lamp is to be kept burning all the time. And there are very specific instructions that's given, and you have to use a special oil on the lamp. You can't just use any oil, so there's a whole process for creating the right kind of oil and consecrating it and putting it in the lamp, and the lamp is then kept burning. Now, another interesting thing about the tabernacle that I think is really significant here is the tabernacle also has an outer court, and we have instructions for creating there's a kind of a fence around it. It's a fence that's made of cloth that denominates this space as holy. Okay, so there's the tabernacle itself, and there's a courtyard around it, and the courtyard is holy. So we actually still have a kind of a remembrance of this in St. Peter's, right? So as you walk through the west doors, right, you don't actually walk directly into this space, do you? You have to walk through a transitional space, the narthex. The court of the tabernacle is in effect the equivalent to the narthex. Okay? It's a reminder to you that you are about to enter into literally a holy place. And so therefore you kind of need to begin the process of preparation for that. Located in that outer court, there's a particular altar, and in Exodus 27 we're given instructions as to how it's to be built. It's the altar of burnt offering. It's made out of bronze. So everything in the tabernacle, because it's close to God, has to be made of gold. And then once you get outside the tabernacle, then you can begin to use less precious metals, bronze, because you're moving steadily away from God's presence. So we have this bronze altar. It's called the altar of burnt offering. And if you've ever seen pictures of it, it looks essentially like a giant barbecue pit, which is basically what it is. The burnt offering, right, is where you take a sacrifice, whatever it is, an ox or whatever, a lamb, and the whole animal is completely combusted on the altar. Now, I'm going to say a little bit more about sacrifice when we get to the Leviticus. I'll spend a good deal of time talking about sacrifice, so I just want to say one thing about it now. The burnt offering is important for a number of reasons, but the main reason is this. The burnt offering isn't just sort of a physical action. As you take this animal, right, whatever it is, and as you offer the whole thing and the whole thing is burned up, right, you're being reminded of something very, very important, and that is your response to God needs to be a total response, right? The burnt offering is a symbol, a sort of an enacted symbol of the kind of response God wants from his people. A complete, total, and absolute response, okay? I'll say more about this later on, but for now I think we can say this. In effect, right, the burnt offering is taking us in a direction that's the exact opposite of sin, okay? So if in the Garden of Eden, right, the man and the woman, remember what they said? Oh, well, we want that fruit in the middle of the garden, and we've decided that we deserve it, so by golly, we're taking it. If sin, right, is the human attempt to kind of claim autonomy and to live under our own lights and to do what we think is right, the opposite, right, really literally is to give ourselves back over to God. And that's one of the things that's going on in the burnt offering. Okay? Every time you offer something to be combusted on that altar, you're in effect saying, you know what? That's what needs to happen to me. I need to be given like totally back to my Creator. So more about that later on as we go through. Now, I want us to jump ahead just a little bit to something that happens with the setting up of the tabernacle. So this is in Exodus 40. So here's the storyline. We get instructions for the tabernacle. Then the incident of the golden calf occurs, which we'll come back to in just a minute. Then we get a detailed account of the tabernacle actually being put together. And I'm going to read to you part of that account. It's Exodus 40, 19 and following. And the reason why I'm reading it to you is because it makes an enormously important point. A point that we're inclined to miss, okay? Now, I know this isn't true of any of you because you're also theologically profound and spiritual. But some people will read, the book of Exodus and they'll start reading the details and they'll start getting bored and then they'll start skipping. I know that never happens here, but it does happen in some places. But I know that, none of you would ever do this, okay? So here's Exodus 40, 19 and following. And here the details are really important. And he spread the tent over the tabernacle and put the covering of the tent as the Lord commanded Moses. And he took the testimony and put it into the ark and put the poles on the ark and set the mercy seat above the ark. And he brought the ark into the tabernacle and set up the veil of the screen and screened the ark of the testimony as the Lord had commanded Moses. He put the table, that is the table of the bread of the presence, in the tent of meeting on the north side of the tabernacle outside the veil, and arranged bread on it before the Lord, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Every time we get a description of the tabernacle being assembled in stages, we get this repetition, as the Lord commanded Moses. Now, interestingly enough, this phrase is repeated 7 times, right? And this actually is now in deliberate repetition of the 7 days of creation. That is, the tabernacle is set up in 7 stages. It replicates the 7 days of creation. And that's a really important detail because it's telling us something really important about the tabernacle. The tabernacle isn't just a tent. It is somehow going to play a role in the reconsecration of the whole creation. We don't know exactly what that role is going to be at this moment, but we're being told that it has that role. Okay, so we're going to want to watch this tabernacle really, really carefully. In effect, right, when you go inside the tabernacle, you are entering creation as it existed before Genesis 3. As you go inside the tabernacle, you are entering the one space in the whole world which has been completely cleansed from the stain of sin. And the tabernacle stands as a promise. First this space, next the whole of creation. Okay? And I'm going to kind of spoil things a little bit because remember what happens in the 21st chapter of the book of Revelation? The New Jerusalem descends out of heaven, and guess what? There's no temple in the New Jerusalem, is there? And the reason for that is the whole creation has been reconsecrated. The whole creation has become a temple as God intended it to be. So we're going to want to watch this tabernacle thing really, really carefully. Now, let me say a few things about the ordination of the priests and their vestments. And once again, that may not sound like a really exciting subject, but it's also really important. So in Exodus 28, we get a detailed description of the vestments that Aaron and his sons are supposed to wear. And I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I'll just describe their significance. So in Exodus 28, verses 1 through 2, we have this. Then bring near you Aaron your brother, so this is God speaking to Moses, and his sons with him, from among the people of Israel, to serve me as priests. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar, Ithamar, and you shall make holy garments for Aaron your brother, and this is really interesting, for glory and for beauty. For glory and for beauty. That is, the idea here is the vestments that Aaron is supposed to wear and the vestments that his sons are supposed to wear are in effect advertisements of God's own beauty and glory. We also discover they have a second function. We also discover that Aaron and his sons actually have to put those vestments on when they go in the tabernacle, because if they walk into the tabernacle without those vestments, guess what? They're struck dead. Okay, so an incentive to wearing your vestments when you need to. But I think the really important thing, right, is this, right? The vestments are reminding both Aaron's sons and Aaron and also the people of Israel, right? Guess what? You're not just kind of like going into this tent to kind of do stuff. Rather, you are coming into this tent to serve me. And therefore, when you walk into this tent, right, you're not just like Aaron or Nadab or Abihu or Eleazar. You are now my servant, and you are going to be wearing a kind of vesture that reflects my beauty and my glory. Okay? And vestments actually serve the same principle today. There's the reason why, we wear vestments, at least in the Anglican tradition, actually, is to hide our individuality. That is, in the final analysis, right, it doesn't really make any difference who's standing behind that altar. It doesn't matter who is standing in that pulpit. What matters is who they're serving. That's the really important thing. Okay, so really important thing. And then we get a description of the ordination of Aaron and his sons, which is also interesting. Oh, one more thing about vestments. I don't want to leave this out. One element of Aaron's vestments is a kind of a turban. We might want to think about it as it's the predecessor of a mitre that bishops wear, that kind of that pointed conical hat. Aaron wears this kind of turban, and then there's a band, a metal band that's placed around the head to hold the turban on. And this is the description of that band in 28:38, or 28:38. You shall make a plate of pure gold and engrave on it like an engraving of a signet. So here's what that band is supposed to have engraved on it. Holy to the Lord. Aaron puts that turban on, and the turban and the metal band advertises something about himself. Holy to the Lord. So when Aaron goes into the tabernacle, he literally represents the people of Israel, because another part of his vestments is this kind of this breastplate that has 12 stones, one stone for each of the tribes of Israel. So in effect, right, as Aaron goes into the tabernacle, he literally represents Israel before God. And as he comes out, he's got that golden band around the turban that says, Holy to the Lord. That is, in effect, claimed, owned by God. Now, the ordination of the priest comes in Exodus 29, and once again, there's a lot of stuff there, so we won't look at all of it. I want to just point out a couple things, because once again, the details are really important. So part of the ordination liturgy is that, first of all, the priests are taken to the door of the tabernacle, And they're washed with water because they're going to be coming in God's presence. They're anointed with oil to sort of set them apart for the service of God. And their vestments are placed upon them. And then a series of sacrifices are offered to purify both the tabernacle and also the priest. So notice the idea right here is, look, these people who are going to be coming into the tabernacle, well, they're sinful human beings, so atonement needs to be made for them as they come into God's presence. There's this lengthy description of the ordination. The thing I want to hold up to you, which is really important, is Exodus 29:35. So here's how all of this ends. Thus you shall do to Aaron, and the speaker here is God giving instructions to Moses. Thus you shall do to Aaron and to his sons according to all that I have commanded you. Through 7 days you shall ordain them. And every day you shall offer a bull as a sin offering for atonement, and you shall purify the altar when you make atonement for it, and shall anoint it to consecrate it. 7 days you shall make atonement for the altar and consecrate it, and the altar shall be most holy. Whatever touches the altar shall become holy. Now, some of you have been to an ordination here, and sometimes people will complain, it kind of lasts a little long because ordinations can take, an hour and a half, 2 hours. This ordination takes 7 days. And once again, that's not coincidental. The 7-day ordination also replicates the 7 days of creation, because somehow, in a way that we don't quite understand yet, but we soon will, also the priesthood is going to play a role in God's reconsecration of his creation. Okay, so we've got Sabbath, we've got tabernacle erected in 7 days, we've got ordination taking place in 7 days. We're being told, right, that all of this is not just like stuff. Somehow, all of this is playing a role in God's reconsecration of creation. As I say, we'll learn more about the details of that later on. Now, one final thing. In Exodus 32, the erection of the tabernacle is interrupted by a kind of an enormous interruption. And I think that the episode of the golden calf in Exodus 32 is really important. So it's almost like, we're setting up the tabernacle. God's getting ready to come and dwell with the people of Israel. And guess what their welcome party for God is? They lapse into idolatry. That's their kind of welcome party for God. They lapse into idolatry. Now, I think we want to understand what's going on here. So you may remember that a while back I said that God's meeting of Israel here at Mount Sinai isn't just simply like the giving of the law, but rather it's more like a marriage. It's God and his people becoming married. So here's a way to understand what's going on in Exodus 32. On her wedding night, Israel commits adultery. On her wedding night, Israel commits adultery. And the big question here is, what is God going to do? What is God going to do with these people who supposedly are entering into a covenant with him and who have now created this sort of alternative God? I'll read to you a little part of the story. I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with it. So remember, Moses comes down from the mountain, and here's like this singing, and there's this music, and people are kind of like dancing around, and he goes out to investigate. And so here's what's happened. When the people of Israel saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said, "Up, make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings that are on your ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." And the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from the hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, here's what they say about the calf: "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Notice what happens here. Okay, we've been waiting down here at the bottom of Mount Sinai for a long time for that Moses guy to come down here. Where the heck is he? Come on, we got things to do. Look, I don't want to worship a God I can't see. And so they called together a meeting of the Golden Calf Committee. Then there's a capital campaign to gather the material. And wham, you end up with this Egyptian-style calf or bull god. They're back in Egypt. Okay? They, in many ways, they've spiritually gone back to Egypt. Later on, when Moses confronts Aaron about this, Aaron does the same thing that Adam did when he was confronted about his sin in the Garden of Eden. Moses, in effect, says, what the heck are you doing? And Aaron says, I don't know. We got all this gold together and melted it down, and all of a sudden, this calf appeared. I was just standing here innocently minding my own business. Yeah, right. So Aaron kind of falls. But the thing that we want to notice here is this. What is God going to do with these people? Now, many of us have heard, right, gosh, back in the Old Testament, God is like judgmental and vengeful, and we didn't get any grace till we got in the New Testament. Well, that's obviously not true, because something really important happens in Exodus 34. God makes a new covenant with the people who have just broken the first one. And in doing that, God passes by Moses on Mount Sinai. And this is where we'll stop. This is Exodus 34, 5. God provides Moses with some reassurance. You can kind of imagine, right, how Moses must have felt about all this, right? He's up on the mountain receiving the covenant. He comes down, the people have broken the covenant. And Moses, in effect, says to God, okay, look, I need you to show me that you're behind me. Okay, I need a little support because I feel like really abandoned by these people. And so that's what happens on Mount Sinai. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. And here we want to think of name as being capitalized. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. So God makes a new covenant with the people of Israel. And what this shows, I think, and we'll see how this turns out. What this shows is, it shows that God, in effect, deals with the people of Israel with a kind of merciful, loving kindness, right? In effect, having chosen the people of Israel as his covenant people, he's not going to let them go. And so, here's how the book of Exodus closes. And this is significant. I think in many ways, it's the high point of the book. It's Exodus 40, verse 34 and following. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle, and Moses was unable to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. But just notice what happens here. After this episode of idolatry, God allows for the tabernacle to still be built, and he still dwells in it, in his glory, with these people who are sinful, who are ungrateful, and who don't really fully understand the nature of the covenant that they've entered into. This is the Old Testament's doctrine of grace, and we'll see that it gets deepened in the New Testament. What we'll do next week is we will start the book of Leviticus.